Hi students, we're back in the studio today for me to demonstrate to you how to make hand-built trays out of slabs of clay that are draped over forms you have at home. So some examples of trays I have here are oval trays. These are slightly larger with a foot ring on the bottom and handles. I have a glazed tray here that was draped into a square mold, and this has a foot ring on the bottom as well and handles. I also have a small tray that I made the other day that I'm going to show you on one of the next videos how to do sgraffito and paper resist using the slips that we gave you at Mt SAC. And the forms that you can use for your slab trays can be just any plastic plate or shallow form that you have at home. This is like a cool square dish that I use sometimes to make forms out of. But I'm going to show you today how to make a form or a dish out of a piece of styrofoam that I'm going to drape clay into. And we all have these. This came with broccoli from the grocery store. And what I do is I use the food, cook the food, and I keep the styrofoam in these various sizes, these stiff styrofoam, wash them, and store them in my studio to make forms out of. So to get started, I'm gonna open up my bag of clay here, and I'm gonna cut right off the top this hunk, set it aside, and what I wanna do is I wanna cut off a level piece of clay if possible. So I look down at my slab, and I see that this slab, when I cut it, will be about 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm gonna cut this away, and this nice flat cut right here will be much easier for me to roll with the rolling pin than if I cut chunks and tried to flatten them out later. This soft clay, I'm gonna place back on my bag, and remember to always bag up, and I squirt a little water and seal this up so my clay doesn't dry out. So you might have a rolling pin at home that will allow you to roll this clay out, but if you don't have a rolling pin, I often use like stiff water bottles, reusable ones, and you can use this to roll your clay out as well. The only thing about the water bottles is because they're plastic, they'll stick to your clay. So what I do is I will put down a piece of newspaper, preferably the comics, and then I can start to roll out my clay. This is starting to split a little bit, and flatten it out if you don't have a rolling pin available to you. Now, I just kind of keep checking to make sure that my clay is not getting too thin. Okay, so for the sake of the video, I'm gonna take away this newspaper and show you how to roll out a slab using the rolling pin. That way you can see how it's starting to thin out. Now, the thing about slabs is that they start stretching, and then at some point they just stop. They get kind of stopped up. The particles of the clay are no longer loose. So in order to keep moving the clay and stretching it and thinning it out, you have to pick up your clay slab and flip it over after every couple of passes with the rolling pin. This helps to stretch your clay out and get it nice and thin and even to make a nice slab. Now I have a large slab here, and this should be good for possibly making 2 trays. Let's see. Not quite. So I'm going to use this part of the clay and save this for a little bit later. So I'm going to take my needle tool and divide this clay. This soft section right here I'm going to set to the side. And if you have scrap clay that you know you're going to use pretty quickly for either decorative purposes or to lay into another form, then you want to use it very quickly. If you know you're not going to use it, then roll it up and put it back in your bag with a little bit of water. You don't want to sacrifice clay. You don't want to create too many clay scraps that you have to deal with later. Okay, so I know I'm going to use that for another form. So I want to just illustrate here how thick I have rolled out my clay slab. And the thickness is about 1/4 of an inch, and that's a really nice thickness for a slab like this. Before I go any further, I need to compress my clay. And clay likes to be compressed, students. When you stretch it out and you ask a lot of the clay to expand over a surface, the particles of clay, which are compacted, tend to loosen up and stretch out as your clay stretches, the microscopic particles. So we, as ceramicists, always stress compressing the surface of your clay and coming back in and really pressing the surface down and compressing it. And I use the back side of my serrated rib or my smooth rib. It doesn't matter, but the rib is the really good tool to really compress the surface. This is an important thing to do on both sides of your clay. If you're doing this and your clay feels a little dry, you can run a dry damp sponge over it and compress again. There you have a nice compressed smooth clay surface that should not crack. Now I've got my tray, and if I just lay a piece of clay in here, I promise you, your clay will stick to your tray, and the only way you'll be able to get it out is to dig it out later with your tool. You don't want to do that. So what do we do to keep that from happening? Well, we like to put a layer of plastic down inside the tray, and I would do this with any form or any plastic form that I have. So I'm going to take this piece of clay and I'm going to lay it on my foam form, and I'm going to pull all the wrinkles out of the plastic, and I'm going to start to press my slab of clay into the form. Once I feel like I've pressed it in and molded it to the interior shape, I can then come in and trim away the sides. Now you get to make some artistic choices here. You can cut the shape of your tray to exactly match the side of the form that you have underneath here, or you can cut it in some sort of sculptural pattern, some sort of wave pattern, some sort of symmetrical pattern, or a way to create an interesting edge or rim to this tray. So that's what I'm gonna do. On the parts where it's a little thicker, I'm gonna swoop up just a little bit and cut a rounded shape that has a fluid edge. That's really different than just something straight-sided. And if you want to cut a straight-sided tray of some kind, you are welcome to do that as well. You might be more of a minimalist. You might like a really modern style, and that's fine too. But I encourage you to try different things. Now I'm going to take my tray, soften the edges a little bit with a damp sponge. And this tray is entirely too soft for me to lift it out of the form and start adding a foot ring to the bottom. So what I need to do is go put it outside in the sun for a little bit and let it stiffen up. Plastic and all. So I'm gonna go take this outside, and then when it's a little bit stiffer, I'll come back and show you how we're going to be decorating these.